The morning sun rose softly over the village of Saint-Céline, brushing the rooftops with golden light. Marcel Dupré adjusted his faded blue postman's cap and began his route, the same one he had walked for nearly 50 years. His leather bag creaked with every step, filled with envelopes tied in neat bundles. He knew every face, every smile, and even the way each old door squeaked when opened. But that morning something was different. Near the bottom of his mailbag lay a small, cream-colored envelope with no stamp, no return address, and only 3 words written in graceful handwriting, for Theo Laurent. He stopped under the shade of a chestnut tree, tilting the letter toward the light. It smelled faintly of lavender, the paper smooth and warm as if someone had just sealed it moments before. "Strange," Marcel murmured, his breath misting the cool morning air. "No one writes letters like this anymore." He slipped it into the pocket closest to his heart, deciding to deliver at last. Something about it felt alive, like it was waiting to be read at the perfect moment. By midday, Marcel reached the small bakery where the smell of fresh brioche floated through the street. Madame Maret waved from behind the counter, flour dusting her apron like snow. "Morning, Marcel." "Same route again?" she teased, handing him a croissant wrapped in paper. He smiled, his wrinkles deepening around his eyes. "Always, madam. The letters keep finding me." She laughed, shaking her head. "Or maybe you keep finding them, old friend." Marcel chuckled, but the strange envelope weighed heavy in his chest pocket, whispering curiosity with every step. When he reached Theo Laurent's home, a quiet stone house at the edge of the village, the boy was sitting outside, mending a small wooden toy. Theo looked up, his brown hair catching the sunlight. "Bonjour, Monsieur Marcel," he said, grinning. "Any mail for us today?" Marcel paused, then slowly pulled out the cream envelope. "Yes, Theo, one very special letter." He handed it over with care, as if passing a fragile treasure. The boy blinked in surprise. "But it doesn't say who it's from." Marcel smiled softly. "Maybe you'll find out when you open it." Theo carefully unsealed the envelope, his small hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper with elegant handwriting. Marcel leaned closer as Theo read aloud. "Dear Theo, you are never alone. Every dream you have ever whispered to the stars has been heard. Keep being kind, and you'll see how light follows you wherever you go." The boy's eyes filled with wonder. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "But who wrote it?" Marcel said nothing for a moment. The afternoon breeze rustled the leaves as he watched sunlight dance in Theo's eyes. "Perhaps," Marcel said gently, "some letters don't need a sender. They simply arrive when someone needs them most." He turned to continue his route, but as he walked away, a soft glow seemed to shimmer around Theo's mailbox. Marcel blinked, thinking it was the sun, but deep down, something inside him whispered that this was only the beginning. The next morning, the bells of Saint-Céline chimed softly as the village awoke. Marcel arrived at the small stone post office just as the mist was lifting from the river. The building stood at the end of Rue de Lillis, its wooden sign faded by decades of sun and rain. Inside, everything smelled faintly of ink and old paper. Stacks of letters waited neatly on the counter, and the clock above the door ticked with a patient rhythm, each second a heartbeat of the little town. Marcel hung his coat on the same hook he had used since his youth and greeted Alone, the young clerk who had started helping him last spring. "Bonjour, Monsieur Marcel," she said cheerfully, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. She was only 19, bright-eyed, with a laugh that could lift any mood. "I sorted the morning mail, but one envelope doesn't have a sender or address. It's odd." She handed him a cream-colored letter identical to the one from yesterday. Marcel froze. The same elegant handwriting. The same soft lavender scent. His heart skipped. "For whom?" he asked quietly. "Madame Maret," Alone replied. "It was inside the sorting drawer when I opened it, but I'm sure it wasn't there last night." They exchanged puzzled looks before Marcel carefully slid the envelope into his mailbag. As he walked toward the bakery, the cobblestones seemed to echo differently under his boots. The village shimmered under sunlight, every sound sharper. The laughter of children, the chatter of sparrows, the soft turning of a water wheel. Marcel passed the fountain where he used to rest his bicycle decades ago. He remembered the joy letters once brought to people, the love notes, the good news, the birthday surprises. But lately, most mail has turned into bills and advertisements. The world had grown quieter, lonelier. Yet these strange letters carried something the world had forgotten. Warmth. Madame Maret was pulling trays of golden baguettes from the oven when Marcel arrived. "Back so soon?" she said, smiling. He nodded and handed her the envelope. Her brow furrowed. "No sender?" He shook his head. She opened it with her flour-dusted fingers and her breath caught. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and as she read, her hands trembled. Dear Mirette, you once baked bread for a stranger who could not pay. That loaf fed not just his body but his hope. The kindness you gave that day has never been forgotten. Tears welled in her eyes. Marcel, that was 30 years ago, she whispered. A traveler came through here during a storm. He was starving. I gave him bread and he vanished the next morning. How could anyone know? Marcel felt a shiver run through him, not of fear but awe. It seems, he said softly, that these letters find those who need to remember the light they've given. Mirette smiled through her tears and placed the letter beside the cash register like a treasure. Maybe heaven just needed a good postman, she said with a wink. Marcel chuckled, but her words stayed in his heart long after he left. By the time Marcel returned to the post office that afternoon, word of the mysterious letters had begun to spread. Villagers gathered near the square, whispering curiously. Did you hear about the baker's letter? They say it came from an angel. Or maybe old Marcel's hiding something magical. He smiled quietly as he passed them, pretending not to hear, but his chest felt warm. That night, as he closed his window and watched the stars appear, he whispered a question to the quiet sky. If these letters truly come from above, why me? The only answer was the soft rustling of trees, as if the world itself was smiling back. The following morning began like any other. Marcel polished his shoes, straightened his cap, and filled his bag with envelopes stacked neatly in order. Yet something in the air felt lighter, almost expectant. The people of Saint-Céline were already waiting for him as he walked through the square. Morning, Postman Marcel, called out little Leah from her mother's flower stall. Any more heavenly letters today? The villagers chuckled softly and Marcel smiled, tipping his hat. The warmth in their eyes made him feel like a young man again. The letters had brought more than messages, they had brought joy. Still, Marcel wondered if it would continue, or if the magic would fade like mist under the sun. Inside the post office, Elone was already sorting the new deliveries. No strange letters today, she said with a small smile. Maybe the mystery is over. But when Marcel reached for his mailbag, his hand froze. Sitting on top of the pile, plain as daylight, was another cream envelope. The handwriting glowed faintly in the morning light, and the scent of lavender drifted through the room. It wasn't here before, Elone whispered. Marcel's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted it. This one read only 2 words, for no one. His heart skipped a beat. Never in his 50 years as a postman had he seen such a thing. For no one, he murmured. Then who should receive it? He decided to keep it with him. Perhaps he would find its owner by feeling, not address. As he began his route, Marcel stopped by the fountain to rest for a moment. He held the envelope up to the sunlight. It shimmered softly, as though the ink itself breathed. He looked around, the old shoemaker sweeping his porch, the blacksmith humming to himself, the children laughing as they chased pigeons. None seemed meant for the letter. So he tucked it safely into his coat pocket and continued walking, his thoughts wandering like clouds over the rooftops. For no one, he repeated silently. Maybe, he thought, some letters were not meant to be delivered at all. The day passed quietly. Marcel completed every stop on his route and returned home just as twilight colored the sky in rose and gold. He placed the letter on his wooden table beside a cup of tea. The house was silent except for the ticking of an old clock and the whisper of wind through lace curtains. He stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was a single line written in the same graceful script. This one is for the one who delivers. His breath caught. The words seemed to glow faintly, then fade back into ink. Marcel pressed the paper to his chest, his eyes glistening. No one had written to him in years, not since his wife's passing long ago. For a moment, the room seemed filled with warmth, as if invisible arms had wrapped him in gentle light. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Marcel dreamed of a great golden field, where thousands of white envelopes floated like doves through the sky. The next morning when he awoke, the mysterious letter was gone. Only the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Elone found him at the post office later that day, humming softly as he sorted the morning mail. "You're smiling today," she said with a grin. "Did you get a letter too?" Marcel looked up at her and winked. "Perhaps I did," he said. "But some letters are better left between the sender and the sky." Outside, church bells rang over Saint-Céline, and the first light of dawn touched the rooftops. The postman lifted his bag once more, his steps lighter than ever before. A week passed and the village of Saint-Céline seemed brighter than ever. Children played longer in the square, shopkeepers greeted each other with laughter, and even the air smelled sweeter, as if touched by invisible joy. Wherever Marcel went, smiles followed him. The villagers had begun calling him Monsieur Miracle, though he always waved away the nickname with a humble grin. "I only deliver what's given to me," he would say. But deep inside, a quiet question kept whispering, "Who is giving them?" The mysterious lavender letters had appeared from nowhere, each one perfectly timed, each one changing a life. Yet no one had ever seen the writer. One morning, while sorting the new deliveries, Elone gasped. "Marcel, look," she said, pointing at a letter that had just appeared between two ordinary envelopes. It hadn't been there seconds before. Marcel approached slowly. It was another cream-colored letter, glowing faintly at the edges. This one read, "For Elone." Her eyes widened. "For me?" she whispered. She held it delicately, as if afraid it would vanish. Marcel nodded softly. "It seems today the postwoman has become the receiver." She smiled nervously and broke the seal. Inside was a small piece of folded paper. Her eyes moved across the page and tears instantly filled them. Marcel waited silently, respecting the quiet moment between her and the unseen writer. "Dear Elone, when you were small, you left a note inside an empty bottle and cast it into the river. You wrote that you wished to make the world a kinder place. That wish never went unheard. Your smile already does it every day." Her hand flew to her mouth. "I forgot about that," she whispered. "I was 8 years old. I threw that bottle near the bridge." Marcel's eyes softened. "Then it seems the river carried your words farther than you thought." Elone looked at him, emotion trembling in her voice. "Do you think these letters are from heaven?" Marcel paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe heaven doesn't always look like clouds and angels," he said quietly. "Sometimes it looks like a letter in lavender ink." She smiled through her tears and hugged him suddenly, her arms warm and strong. For a long moment neither spoke. That evening, the sky turned violet as the last sun rays bathed the village in soft gold. Marcel sat on the bench near the fountain, gazing at the reflection of the stars. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly baked bread from Moret's bakery and the faint echo of laughter from children playing nearby. He opened his notebook and began to write down the names of everyone who had received a letter. Theo, Moret, Elone. He left 3 blank spaces beneath them. 3 letters, and each one filled a heart with light, he murmured. But why those 3? He tapped his pen thoughtfully. Then, as if in answer, something caught his eye, shimmering dust drifting across the water's surface. It glowed faintly lavender. Marcel leaned forward, heart racing. The fountain glistened as though ink from another world had spilled into it. That night, long after everyone had gone to sleep, Marcel returned to the post office. Moonlight poured through the window, painting the floor in silver. On the main desk sat a single envelope, glowing brighter than any before. He approached quietly, his heart beating fast. Written in the same graceful script were 5 words that made him tremble. "Deliver before sunrise. For Clara." Marcel froze. Clara Laurent, the widow who lived atop the hill, who hadn't left her home since her husband's passing 2 years ago. He held the letter close and whispered, "Then tomorrow, we'll deliver a little light to the hill." Dawn arrived softly over Saint-Céline, spilling pale gold across the rooftops and painting the cobblestones with gentle light. Marcel buttoned his coat against the cool breeze and began the slow climb toward the hill. The path wound between tall poplar trees, their leaves whispering secrets above him. In his hand, he held the lavender-scented letter marked for Clara. It seemed to pulse faintly with warmth, as if eager to reach its destination. Birds sang in the distance, and somewhere below, the village bells chimed the hour. Marcel smiled to himself. There was peace in this work, a rhythm that felt almost holy. He had walked this same route for decades, but today every step seemed touched by purpose. At the top of the hill stood a small white cottage with ivy climbing its stone walls. The shutters were closed tight, and the garden that once bloomed with roses had grown wild. Marcel paused at the gate, feeling a mix of tenderness and hesitation. Clara Laurent had been the town's piano teacher before her husband's sudden passing. Since then she rarely spoke to anyone. Marcel had not seen her smile in years. Taking a breath, he gently knocked on the door. For a moment, there was only silence, then the faint sound of footsteps. The door creaked open, revealing Clara's kind but tired eyes. "Marcel," she said softly, surprised. "You're up here so early." He removed his cap politely. "Good morning, Madame Clara. Forgive the hour, but I have a letter for you." She frowned slightly. "For me? That can't be right, I've not received a letter in ages." Marcel smiled gently and held it out. "This one has no sender, only your name. Clara took it slowly, her hands trembling as though she were holding something sacred. The lavender fragrance filled the air between them. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Marcel watched silently as she read, her eyes widening and then softening. A single tear slid down her cheek. She read aloud, her voice quivering. "Dear Clara, your music never stopped. It still floats above the rooftops and lingers in the hearts of those who once listened. The world misses your song. Please play again." Her lips parted, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "He used to tell me the same thing, every night before I played." She pressed the letter against her heart, her eyes closing. "Marcel," she said quietly, "this handwriting, it's almost identical to my husband's." Marcel's throat tightened, but he managed a gentle smile. "Then maybe he just needed you to hear it one more time." Clara exhaled shakily, a small, fragile laugh escaping her. "I thought the piano would stay silent forever." She looked past him toward the horizon where sunlight touched the village rooftops. "But perhaps," she whispered, "it's time to let it sing again." That evening, for the first time in 2 years, the people of Saint-Céline heard music drifting down from the hill. The soft, trembling notes of Clara's piano flowed through the air like the return of spring. Shopkeepers paused mid-work, children stopped their games, and Marcel, resting on the bench near the fountain, closed his eyes to listen. Every note seemed to heal something unseen. When the last chord faded, applause rose from the village below. Marcel smiled to himself, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. The letter had done more than deliver words, it had awakened a soul. He looked up at the glowing sky and whispered, "Whoever you are, keep sending them." As the first stars appeared, the breeze carried a faint scent of lavender, swirling gently around the fountain like a blessing. The next morning, Saint-Céline glowed with a quiet happiness that seemed to rest over every rooftop. The villagers were still talking about the piano on the hill. "It was like hearing heaven breathe," Madame Maret said, smiling as she kneaded her dough. Even Alone had tears in her eyes when she arrived at the post office. "The whole town listened," she whispered. Marcel nodded, his chest warm with pride. Yet when he opened the morning drawer of deliveries, a new envelope rested on top, cream paper, lavender fragrance, and handwriting that seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light. The words read, "For Jules. Deliver at sunset." Marcel turned the name over in his mind. Jules was the quiet orphan boy who helped tend the lamps along the river at night. He rarely spoke but always smiled when he saw Marcel pass by. The postman's heart stirred. "Then we'll light his evening with more than lanterns," he said softly. The day passed peacefully, and when the sun began to lower over the hills, Marcel found Jules near the river, trimming the wick of an old lantern. The boy was small and wiry, his hands calloused from work, his clothes patched but clean. "Bonsoir, Jules," Marcel greeted warmly. "Working late, I see." Jules looked up and grinned shyly. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Marcel. The wind keeps putting out the lamps." Marcel crouched beside him and handed over the glowing envelope. "Seems you've got mail, my boy." Jules blinked in surprise. "For me? But I never get letters." "Well," Marcel smiled, "maybe tonight you do." The boy turned it over curiously before opening it with care, unfolding the paper beneath the fading light. He read slowly, his lips moving soundlessly, then stopped. His small chest rose and fell quickly. Marcel touched his shoulder. "What does it say?" Jules looked up, his voice trembling. "Dear Jules, you light the world more than you know. Every lamp you tend keeps someone safe in the dark. You were never forgotten. A heart still watches over you with pride." For a moment the boy said nothing. Then he looked toward the river, eyes glistening. "My father used to say something like that," he whispered. "Before the accident." Marcel's throat tightened, but he smiled gently. Then maybe this letter carried what his voice left behind. Jules pressed the paper to his chest, clutching it tightly. "Do you think he sees me?" Marcel placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think he never stopped." The wind stirred, and one of the lanterns flickered, then burned brighter, golden and steady. Jules gasped softly. "It's never done that before." Marcel nodded slowly. "Maybe it just wanted to remind you that light remembers light." They stood side by side as dusk melted into night, watching the lamps along the river glow one by one. Their reflections danced across the water like floating stars. When the last flame shimmered to life, Jules turned to Marcel with a small, radiant smile. "Thank you, monsieur." Marcel patted his shoulder. "Don't thank me, lad. I only deliver." As he walked back toward the village, the lamps lit his path in perfect rhythm, brighter than he'd ever seen them. The breeze carried the faint scent of lavender once again, and somewhere in the distance, a piano note echoed softly, a single lingering sound that seemed to say, "You're doing well, Marcel." He smiled beneath the starlight and whispered back, "I hope so." The next afternoon, the sun rested gently over Saint-Céline, turning the village fountain into a pool of gold. Marcel sat nearby with his satchel on his knees, sipping tea from his worn metal flask. The air smelled of fresh bread and lilac blossoms. Everything felt at peace, but then he noticed someone new standing by the fountain. A tall stranger dressed in a light brown coat, a wide hat shadowing his face. He wasn't from Saint-Céline, that much was clear. His boots were travel-worn, and his hands trembled slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper. Marcel, ever the friendly postman, rose from his bench. "Bonjour, monsieur," he said kindly. "You look like you've come a long way." The stranger looked up, revealing soft gray eyes filled with weariness. "I have," he replied. "I'm searching for someone, but I don't even know if she's still here." Marcel tilted his head. "Perhaps I can help. I've been walking these streets for 40 years, there's not a door I haven't knocked on." The stranger hesitated, his voice trembling. Her name was Elaine Dubois. She used to live by the mill near the poplar grove. Marcel's eyes softened. He remembered her. Elaine had passed away 3 winters ago. She'd been kind, quiet, and always left apples by her window for the birds. Marcel spoke gently. "She's gone, monsieur. But she was well loved here." The stranger's shoulders sagged. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I feared as much," he murmured. Then from his coat pocket he pulled out a faded envelope. "I wrote to her years ago," he said softly. "But I never sent it. I kept it up all this time. Foolish, perhaps." Marcel reached out his hand. "May I see it?" The man nodded, and Marcel carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note, written in shaking handwriting. "Elaine, if you still think of me, light a candle by your window on the 1st of every month. I'll look for its glow from wherever I am." Marcel's breath caught. He looked up. "Monsieur, every 1st of the month there was a candle in that window. Until the day she passed." The stranger's lips parted in disbelief. His eyes filled with tears and his voice broke. "She remembered?" Marcel nodded firmly. "She never missed a single one." The man stepped closer to the fountain, his reflection shimmering in the water. He sank to his knees, whispering, "Then she knew, she must have known." Marcel placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Love doesn't vanish, monsieur. It travels quietly like the wind, or letters that find their way home." The stranger smiled faintly through his tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've delivered something even I couldn't." As he stood to leave, Marcel noticed something lying on the fountain's edge, a lavender-colored envelope resting neatly on the stone. His heart skipped. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up and turned it over. The words shimmered faintly, "For the man by the fountain." Marcel's eyes widened, and he handed it to the stranger silently. The man hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a short message in familiar handwriting. "I kept the candle burning. I saw you in every flame. Rest easy, my love." The stranger pressed the paper to his heart, tears flowing freely now. The breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of lavender once again. Marcel looked toward the sky as a cloud parted, letting sunlight spill across the fountain. The stranger turned toward the road leading out of the village, his shoulders lighter, his steps sure. Marcel watched him disappear down the sunlit path, whispering softly, "Safe travels, monsieur." The postman sat again by the fountain, heart full, realizing these letters were no longer just paper and ink. They were something divine, something that healed. And as the wind shifted gently around him, he could almost hear a whisper, "Keep delivering, Marcel. The world still needs you." The following morning, Saint-Céline awoke beneath a silver fog that curled softly around the rooftops. Marcel stepped out of his cottage, his breath visible in the cool air, his satchel slung across his shoulder. As always, he paused by the river bridge to greet the morning with gratitude. The water beneath shimmered faintly, and a gentle breeze brushed against his cheek. When he reached the post office, Elaine was already waiting by the counter with a smile. "You won't believe this," she said, holding up another lavender envelope. Marcel's heart fluttered. "Who's it for this time?" She turned it around carefully. The name written in that elegant, mysterious hand read, "For Amélie, the girl who paints dreams." Marcel smiled warmly. "Amélie Laurent, the quiet one who sells her paintings near the old church." He nodded thoughtfully. "Let's go deliver this one in person." By mid-morning, the fog had lifted, revealing the cobbled square where Amélie sat each day beside her small wooden easel. She couldn't have been more than 18, with wild brown curls tied by a ribbon and a face always smudged with paint. Her art stall displayed dozens of landscapes, each one full of light and warmth, though Amélie herself rarely smiled. Marcel approached softly. "Mademoiselle Amélie," he said kindly, "special delivery for you." She looked up in surprise. "For me? But no one ever writes to me." He chuckled. Then it seems someone decided it was time. He handed her the lavender envelope, its delicate scent catching in the air. She turned it over in her hands for a long moment before gently opening it. Inside was a single folded sheet of thick paper, upon which was written, "Dear Amélie, you paint the light so beautifully, but why hide from it? The world doesn't just need your art. It needs you. The frame is empty because it's waiting for your face." Her eyes filled instantly with tears. She blinked them back, whispering, "The frame," and then she looked down at the unfinished painting beside her easel. It showed a vast meadow beneath the sunrise, but the canvas had a blank white space in the center, an unpainted silhouette. "How did they know?" she murmured. Marcel tilted his head. "Know what, my dear?" Amélie bit her lip, her voice trembling. "I've been painting this since my mother died. She always told me I should paint myself into the light. But I never could." She touched the letter gently, as if afraid it might vanish. This feels like her words." Marcel placed a hand on the edge of her easel, his eyes warm. "Maybe she found a way to remind you." Amélie smiled through her tears. "Do you really think so?" He nodded. "I think love has a way of sending messages to those who are ready to hear them." She looked at the painting again, the blank shape glowing softly in the sunlight. Then, for the first time in years, she dipped her brush into gold paint and began to fill the empty frame. Her hands trembled, but the strokes grew surer with each movement. Passers-by stopped to watch as her face slowly appeared in the canvas, alive, glowing, and free. When she finished, Amélie stepped back, breathless. The painting shone with light. Marcel smiled quietly. "There," he said. "Now the meadow is complete." She looked at him with a radiant expression that made her seem older and younger all at once. "Thank you, Monsieur Marcel, for bringing me myself." He touched his cap, eyes misty. "Don't thank me, child. I just carry what's meant to arrive." As he turned to go, the breeze lifted once again, carrying the faint scent of lavender through the square. Amélie looked up, eyes wide. "Do you smell that?" she whispered. Marcel smiled knowingly. "Every time," he said softly. As he walked away, the bells of Saint-Céline began to ring, and behind him, Amélie's laughter echoed across the plaza like sunlight breaking through clouds. That evening, as Marcel locked the post office for the night, he glanced at the notice board by the door. Someone had pinned a small copy of Amélie's painting there, a girl standing in sunlight, smiling. Beneath it was written in neat handwriting, "To the postman who delivers hope." Marcel chuckled softly, touched his cap, and whispered to the air, "You're working wonders, whoever you are." And far off, from the hills above the town, the scent of lavender drifted again, stronger this time, almost like a promise. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows of Saint-Céline's post office, filling it with a golden glow. Marcel hummed softly as he sorted the new deliveries, each letter a tiny story waiting to unfold. But when he reached the bottom of the wooden tray, his hand froze. There was a letter unlike any other, aged, yellowed by time, its paper thin and fragile. It had no lavender scent, no elegant handwriting. The ink was faded, and across the front, written in trembling cursive, were the words, "To be delivered when found." There was no name, no address, just that single mysterious line. Marcel turned it over carefully, curiosity rising. "How long have you been hiding?" he whispered. Elone peeked over from her desk. "Another of your magic letters?" she teased. Marcel smiled faintly. "No, this one feels different. Older. As if it's been waiting." He decided to take it home to examine it with a lamplight. That evening, he placed it on his table beside a cup of warm tea and his spectacles. The faint glow of the oil lamp danced across the envelope. With care, Marcel slid a knife along the edge and opened it. Inside was a folded sheet, its ink faint but still legible. Read. "To the one who reads this. If you find this letter, please deliver it to the person who needs it most. It is meant for no one, yet for everyone. Inside these words lies comfort, and in comfort, a kind of home. A friend." Marcel blinked slowly, the corners of his lips curling upward. "A letter with no address," he murmured. "A message waiting for a soul." He leaned back, thinking deeply. Who in Saint-Céline needed such a letter right now? He thought of Clara, who had returned to her piano. Jules, who had found his light. Amélie, who had painted herself into the sun. Each had been touched by the mysterious lavender letters, but this one was different. It didn't carry a name. It carried a purpose. Marcel folded it gently and slipped it into his coat pocket. "You'll find your home," he promised softly. "Even if you don't know where that is yet." The next morning Marcel wandered through the market square, observing the familiar faces he'd served for years. Madame Maret laughed as she sold her bread. Little Lucien chasing a chicken through the stalls. Old Bernard arguing about the price of cheese. Everyone seemed content, but then at the edge of the square, Marcel noticed a figure sitting alone on a bench. A woman wrapped in a faded shawl, her face hidden, her suitcase beside her. Her posture spoke of exhaustion, her eyes lost in thought. Marcel's heart stirred. He approached quietly. "Bonjour, madame," he greeted. "You look like you've traveled far." The woman looked up with a faint, weary smile. "Too far," she whispered. "And I don't know where I'm going next." Marcel nodded slowly, his hand moving to his coat pocket. "Perhaps," he said softly, "this belongs to you." He handed her the weathered envelope. She hesitated, then opened it. As she read the letter, her lips quivered. A tear rolled down her cheek, followed by another. "Who wrote this?" she whispered. Marcel smiled gently. "Someone who knows that sometimes the right words arrive when you stop looking for them." She pressed the letter against her heart, her shoulders trembling. "I thought I had no one," she said. "But this feels like being seen again." Marcel nodded, his own eyes glistening. "That's what letters do," he said softly. "They remind us that someone, somewhere, still cares." As he walked away, the air shifted. The woman looked after him, tears falling freely, but her expression had changed. The despair was gone, replaced by a fragile but steady peace. Marcel reached the center of the square, stopped, and turned toward the fountain. The breeze brushed past him, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of lavender once again. He smiled up at the sky, whispering, "You sent this one too, didn't you?" The sunlight glinted against the fountain's surface, and in that moment he felt certain the letters had a guardian, unseen but very real. And as he continued down the cobblestone path, the village bells began to chime, soft and steady, like the heartbeat of Saint-Céline itself. The next day dawned with gentle rain, the kind that drummed softly against rooftops and left Saint-Céline wrapped in a silver mist. Marcel walked his morning route beneath his old brown umbrella, the rhythmic patter of raindrops echoing through the quiet streets. The village smelled of wet earth and blooming jasmine. As he reached the post office, he found Alone waiting by the counter once more, her eyes wide with wonder. "Monsieur Marcel," she whispered, "it happened again." She pointed to the center table. There, glowing faintly beneath the lamplight, rested another lavender envelope. The handwriting was as delicate as always, but this one felt somehow warmer, more tender. Marcel picked it up and read aloud, "For Marguerite, the widow who still tends the roses." A soft smile crossed his lips. "Ah," he said fondly, "Madame Marguerite Duval. She lives beyond the river bend, near the old vineyard." Alone nodded. "She still keeps her garden, even though she can barely walk." Marcel tucked the letter gently into his satchel. "Then today," he said, "her roses will bloom a little brighter." He set out into the rain, his boots splashing lightly through puddles, his umbrella bobbing as he made his way past the fields and over the small stone bridge. The vineyard appeared through the mist, and at the far edge stood Marguerite's cottage, framed by climbing roses that drooped under the weight of the rain. Marcel called softly, "Madame Marguerite? It's your postman." The door opened slowly, revealing a tiny woman wrapped in a knitted shawl, her silver hair pinned neatly. "Oh, Marcel," she said with a kind smile. "Out in this weather? You'll catch your death." He laughed softly. "A postman doesn't melt, madam. Besides, I brought you something special." Her eyes lit with curiosity as he handed her the lavender envelope. "For me?" she asked, her frail fingers trembling as she took it. "But I haven't had a letter since Henri," her voice broke off. Marcel smiled gently. "Then maybe this is one you were meant to have." She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the page. As she read, her lips parted and tears welled in her eyes. "Dear Marguerite, the roses still grow because you loved them first. They bloom for the hands that planted them, for the heart that waited by the window. Love doesn't end, it changes its garden." She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes, her tears mingling with the rain that had drifted inside. "It's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Henri used to say those words every spring." Marcel's throat tightened. "Then perhaps he found a way to write again," he said softly. She nodded slowly, smiling through her tears. "You know," she murmured, After he passed, I stopped talking to the roses. I thought they wouldn't listen anymore." She looked toward the garden where the rain was easing. But maybe they've been listening all along. Together, they stepped outside as the rain began to fade. The garden shimmered with raindrops, each rose glistening as though dusted with light. Marguerite knelt carefully, her frail hands brushing a bloom. "You waited for me," she whispered. Marcel stood behind her, feeling warmth in his chest that reached deeper than words. The air filled again with that familiar lavender scent, so faint, yet so sure. Marguerite turned, smiling through her tears. "Thank you, Marcel. You've brought me back to my garden." He touched his cap, his voice soft. "No, madam. The garden just needed you to open its gate again." As he left, the sky broke open into sunlight, and the roses lifted their faces toward the light. Marcel turned once more to look at the cottage. Marguerite stood by the doorway, holding the letter close, surrounded by color and life. For the first time in years, her roses were truly blooming. The old postman smiled to himself. Every letter, every soul, every tear, they were all threads of the same unseen hand at work. And as he crossed back over the bridge, the scent of lavender drifted behind him, mingling with the sweetness of the roses and the whisper of the wind. Autumn had begun to touch Saint-Céline, laying gold across the trees and scattering leaves along the cobblestones. The air was crisp, the kind that woke the lungs with every breath. Marcel, scarf tucked neatly around his neck, arrived at the post office to find yet another lavender envelope resting on the table. Its fragrance was stronger this time, filling the whole room with sweetness. Elone handed it to him carefully. "This one feels different," she whispered. Marcel nodded as he read the inscription. "For Thibaut, the painter who forgot the sky." Marcel knew the name. Thibaut Moreau was once the most admired painter in Saint-Céline. His canvases were known for skies so vast and luminous that villagers swore they could feel the wind just by looking. But years ago, after losing his beloved wife, he stopped painting the heavens altogether. His works became dark, heavy, earthbound. Marcel remembered seeing him hunched at his easel, staring at blank canvases for hours. "Perhaps this letter will lift his eyes again," Marcel murmured. With steady steps, he made his way to Thibaut's small studio on the edge of town. The door creaked open to reveal a tall, thin man with hollow eyes, streaks of paint across his hands. "Marcel," he said dully, "I wasn't expecting anyone." The postman smiled warmly. "No one ever expects a letter, yet here I am." He handed over the lavender envelope. Thibaut frowned, puzzled. "A letter? For me?" He tore it open slowly, his brow furrowed as he began to read. "Dear Thibaut, the sky has not vanished. It waits for your eyes to lift, your hand to remember. She is still there in every sunrise, in every brushstroke you've hidden away. Paint her back into the world. She is waiting in the blue." The painter's breath caught. His hand trembled so violently that the paper slipped from his fingers onto the floor. He pressed his palms to his face, his shoulders shaking. "These are her words," he whispered hoarsely. "She always told me to paint the blue back into the world, when my shadows grew too dark." His knees nearly buckled, but Marcel caught his arm, steadying him. "Then perhaps she's asking you again," Marcel said softly. "Through this letter." Thibaut sank into his chair, his eyes brimming with tears. He looked at the half-finished canvas before him, gray, heavy, lifeless. Slowly, almost fearfully, he reached for his brush. Dipping it into a pot of deep azure, he touched the canvas. The first stroke of sky stretched across the top, trembling but alive. Stroke after stroke followed, until the gray began to retreat, giving way to a horizon of light. Marcel watched silently, his chest tight, as the painter's movements grew steadier, fuller, almost desperate with release. The canvas transformed, clouds forming, light breaking through, a hint of endless blue returning to the frame. At last, Thibaut lowered the brush, his face wet with tears. He turned to Marcel, his voice breaking. "She's back, I can see her again. In the sky." Marcel smiled through misty eyes. "She never left. She was only waiting for you to look up." The two men sat quietly, the smell of paint and lavender mingling in the air, as outside the window, the real sky spread wide and brilliant over Saint-Céline. Later that evening, as Marcel left the studio, he turned back one last time. The open window revealed Thibaut at his easel, painting with a fire not seen in years. His brush moved quickly, chasing light as though afraid to lose it again. The sky above the village glowed with a stunning sunset, as if mirroring the rebirth happening within those walls. Marcel inhaled deeply. The breeze was cool, fragrant with lavender, and carrying the faintest sound of laughter, a woman's, light and free as though it floated down from the heavens themselves. Marcel touched his cap and whispered, "Merci." The morning sun poured softly through the classroom windows of Saint-Céline's little schoolhouse, where children's laughter usually filled the air. But today the room was quiet. Marcel stood at the doorway, hat in hand, looking at the small wooden desk that sat empty near the chalkboard. On it lay a stack of untouched books and a single piece of chalk, still broken from the last lesson. The teacher, Madame Marcel Dupré, had been away for weeks since losing her husband. The schoolchildren whispered that she might never return. Marcel sighed gently. He had taught all of them to write their first letters, and now he was about to deliver one to their teacher. That morning, another lavender envelope had appeared on the post office counter. Simple, delicate, glowing faintly in the light. On its front, in the familiar graceful handwriting, were the words, "For Lucille, the teacher whose lessons still echo." Marcel had known Lucille since she was a young girl helping him carry letters after school. Now she was the one who guided Saint-Céline's children, though grief had silenced her voice. He tucked the envelope carefully into his pocket and set out toward her small cottage near the orchard. When he arrived, Lucille was sitting by the window, her eyes blankly tracing the falling leaves outside. Her once bright face seemed dimmed, and the stack of old lesson plans sat gathering dust beside her chair. "Marcel," she said quietly as he entered. "I'm sorry, I'm not taking visitors." He smiled gently. "That's all right. I'm not here to visit, I'm here to deliver." He placed the lavender envelope on the table. "A letter for you." She frowned softly. "From whom?" "No name," he replied. "Just words that seemed to know where to go." Her trembling fingers broke the seal. She read in silence, her lips moving faintly as she whispered the words. "Dear Lucille, your lessons didn't stop when your voice did. The children still carry your words in their laughter. The chalk waits for your hand, the desk for your return. You are still their light even when you can't see it." Her breath hitched. She covered her mouth and tears streamed down her cheeks. "This," she whispered, "this is what he told me the night before he died. He said, 'Your voice will outlive you, Lucille. Even when you're tired, it will keep teaching.'" She pressed the paper to her chest, her voice trembling. "I thought I had nothing left to give." Marcel crouched beside her. "You have everything," he said softly. "You gave the children the courage to dream. And that's something even sorrow can't take away." Lucille looked toward her writing desk. Slowly she rose and walked to it. She picked up a stick of chalk from the ledge, holding it as though it were something sacred. Then, with a deep breath, she began to write across the small slate by the window, "Tomorrow we learn again." She turned to Marcel, tears still shining but her eyes alive for the first time in months. "Will they come back?" she asked softly. Marcel smiled. "Children never forget their teacher. They'll run back faster than the morning bell." The next day, Saint-Céline's little schoolhouse filled once more with the sounds of laughter and chalk scratching across the board. Marcel passed by on his route and paused at the window. Inside, Lucille stood tall before her students, her hair catching the morning light. On her desk sat the lavender letter, framed neatly beside a vase of wildflowers. She was smiling again, her voice gentle but sure. Marcel tipped his cap, his heart swelling with quiet pride. As he walked away, the breeze shifted, carrying with it that now familiar scent of lavender, and faintly, he thought he heard a whisper on the wind, "Well delivered, Marcel. Well delivered." The sea beyond Saint-Céline had always glimmered like polished glass, but that evening the horizon looked heavy and gray. The wind had turned restless, tugging at the tall grass along the cliffs. Marcel's bicycle creaked as he pedaled toward the coast, his satchel pressed against his chest. A fisherman had come to him earlier, out of breath, shouting, "The lighthouse is dark, Marcel. Old Captain Alaric hasn't lit it in 2 nights." Marcel's heart sank. Without its light, sailors couldn't find their way back. He didn't hesitate. He locked the post office door and set off toward the cliffs, the storm clouds gathering like bruises above him. When he reached the lighthouse, its great lantern sat cold and still, the iron frame rusting from years of salt and wind. At the base of the tower, he found Alaric sitting by a driftwood fire, his old coat wrapped tightly around his shoulders. His face was pale, his beard untrimmed, and his eyes hollow. "Alaric," Marcel called softly, stepping closer. "The sea is calling for your light." The old man barely moved. "What's the point, Marcel?" he muttered. "The ships have new machines now. They don't need my lamp anymore. I've lit the sky for 30 years and still I was forgotten." His words drifted into the wind like ashes. Marcel's chest ached. He knew that tone, the voice of someone who had lost not his purpose, but his belief that it still mattered. He sat beside him, pulling out a letter, lavender paper, faintly glowing. It had been waiting at the post office that morning with no name. Until now. The envelope read only, "For the keeper of lost lights." Marcel handed it to him quietly. It seemed someone remembered. Alaric's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The wind hushed as he read aloud, his deep voice cracking. "Dear keeper, your light still burns even when unseen. Every soul that reached shore owes you their breath. The sea remembers every flicker of your flame. When your lamp dims, let your heart be the one that shines." For a long moment the old man said nothing. His jaw tightened and tears glimmered behind his eyes. "Do you know," he said hoarsely, "I once saved 30 men in one night? They said the beacon was a miracle. I thought I'd never feel that again." Marcel rested a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's remind the sea who you are." He rose, gripping the railing of the tower stairs. Together they climbed, step by echoing step, until they reached the lantern room. Dust blanketed everything and the great glass lens was clouded. Without a word, Marcel began to wipe the glass while Alaric opened the oil valves, his old hands moving from memory. The storm was rolling closer now, the wind howling through the broken shutters. "It's no use," Alaric shouted. "She's too old to shine again." But Marcel struck a match, holding it to the wick. For a second, the flame flickered, then flared, alive and golden. The lens caught the light, magnified it, and threw it across the sea in a bright, sweeping beam. The ocean responded with a roar. Down below, waves shimmered as the light danced over them like the hand of God itself. Alaric fell to his knees, overwhelmed. "She's alive again," he whispered. "After all these years." Marcel smiled faintly, his coat whipping in the wind. "She just needed someone to believe in her keeper." They stayed until dawn, watching the light guide a small fishing boat safely home. When the sun broke the horizon, Alaric placed the lavender letter back into Marcel's hands. "Keep it," he said softly. "It belongs with the man who delivers hope." Marcel shook his head gently. "No," he said. "It belongs right here with the light that never gave up." He left the lighthouse as morning broke, the beam still turning over the sea. The villagers would later say that night the light looked different, warmer, more alive, as though the sea itself had smiled. As Marcel reached the village edge, he paused to look back. The tower gleamed beneath the rising sun, and through the morning mist, he could almost see a faint figure standing atop it, saluting him with pride. For the first time, Marcel whispered not to the wind but to the sky, "Thank you, whoever you are." The first snow of winter drifted gently over Saint-Céline, blanketing the rooftops in silver. The post office smelled of pine and firewood, and Marcel sat at his desk, sipping tea as he sorted the last of the season's mail. He had delivered hundreds of letters that year, letters of love, forgiveness, reunion, and hope. But this morning there was only one envelope left. It lay at the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in golden thread instead of lavender ribbon. Marcel froze as his eyes fell on the handwriting. It was the same as all the others, delicate, elegant, but this one was addressed to Marcel Dupré, the postman of Saint-Céline. His hands trembled as he lifted it from the drawer. For the first time in decades he was the one receiving a letter. The scent of lavender filled the room, stronger than ever before, and his chest tightened. He hesitated to open it. Who would write to an old postman? He whispered, smiling faintly to himself. He placed the envelope against his heart and walked to the old oak bench outside, where he'd often watched the sunset with his satchel beside him. Snowflakes melted against his gloves as he broke the seal. The letter inside was longer than any before. The ink shimmered faintly in the cold light, and the first words made his breath catch. "Dear Marcel, you have delivered more than letters, you've delivered hearts back to life. Every soul you've touched has carried your kindness further than you can imagine. The piano still sings, the lanterns still glow, the school still laughs, and the lighthouse still shines, all because you believe that every message matters. You never knew who wrote the letters and you never asked. That's why you were chosen. You were not just the postman of Saint-Céline, you were its heartbeat." Marcel blinked hard, his vision blurring as tears gathered. He kept reading. "Each letter you delivered came from one soul to another, guided by faith, not distance. You gave hope to strangers and light to the forgotten. This is your final letter, Marcel, but not your final journey. The village will keep your spirit alive in every word that passes from hand to hand. For you showed them that kindness can travel further than any horse or wheel." The letter ended with one last line that struck deep into his chest. "Thank you, Marcel. Signed with eternal gratitude, the one who watches." The wind stirred. He closed his eyes and felt warmth spread through him, not from the fire, but from within. 1,000 memories rushed back at once. Ilone's laughter after her father's letter, the lanterns glowing along the river, Lucille's chalk against the blackboard, the lighthouse beams sweeping the sea. He realized that every story, every miracle, every whisper of hope had come from this same mysterious sender, and yet he was part of it all. He rose from the bench and looked toward the horizon, where the faint outline of the lighthouse shone in the snow. His lips quivered into a smile. "You were watching all along," he murmured. "But perhaps it wasn't just one of you, it was all of them." He walked through the village streets as snowflakes glowed under the lanterns. Children waved from windows and shopkeepers smiled as he passed. Everyone he had once helped was still there, alive, happy, changed. He tipped his cap to each of them, whispering his quiet farewell. The lavender scent lingered in the air, warm and bright. As night fell, Marcel returned to his post office one last time. He placed the golden-threaded envelope into the drawer with care and locked it gently. Then he sat by the window listening to the snow fall. The moonlight danced across the village square, and from somewhere unseen, faint piano music began to play the same melody that had once echoed through the valley. Marcel smiled through tears. "Well," he whispered, his voice soft but sure, "the mail is delivered." The clock struck midnight. A soft breeze entered through the window, brushing against his face like a blessing. Marcel closed his eyes with peace in his heart, the scent of lavender still surrounding him. Outside, Saint-Céline slept soundly, its lamps glowing brighter than ever before. The postman's chair rocked gently by the fire as if touched by an invisible hand, steady, proud, eternal. Spring returned to Saint-Céline with the sound of church bells and the scent of fresh lilacs. The snow had melted, the river ran free again, and the whole village seemed to hum with life. The post office door creaked open that morning, but there was no Marcel behind the counter. Instead, little Jules, now taller and proud, stood at the doorway holding a worn leather satchel close to his chest. The villagers gathered in silence. Madame Mirette wiped her hands on her apron and whispered, "It's true then, he's gone." Ilone pressed a hand to her heart. "He didn't leave us," she said softly. "He just finished his route." The old bell above the post office door rang once clear and sweet, like a farewell note carried by the wind. The mayor stepped forward, his voice trembling. "He gave this town more than letters," he said. "He gave it back its soul." The people nodded, their eyes glistening. On the counter, resting neatly beside his spectacles, lay a sealed envelope with golden edges. It was addressed not to one person but to the people of Saint-Céline. They opened it together, the room silent except for the gentle crackle of the fire. Inside, written in Marcel's careful hand, were words that made every heart tremble. "Dear friends, thank you for letting me be your messenger. But the truth is, you were the ones delivering to each other. Every smile, every kind word, every small act of courage that was your letter to the world. Keep writing. Keep delivering it. Keep believing in the magic of small things." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the wind seemed to still, as if listening. Lucille, the teacher, stepped forward and placed the letter into a glass frame beside Marcel's old chair. "His words will stay," she whispered. Outside, the church bells rang again softly, slowly, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Jules looked up at the clock tower, eyes wet but shining. "He's still here," he murmured. "Every time someone writes a letter or lights a lamp or forgives someone, that's him." The others nodded, some smiling through their tears. That evening, as twilight painted the sky pink and gold, the villagers gathered by the river. Jules carried a lantern, the same one that had glowed so brightly that night years ago. He placed it on the water, and one by one, everyone added their own. Lucille, Ilone, Madame Mirette, even old Captain Alaric, standing tall in his sea coat. The river filled with 100 glowing lights drifting slowly toward the sea, their reflections dancing like stars reborn. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Suddenly, the church bell rang once more, clearer, louder, and deeper than before. The villagers gasped softly and looked up. The windows of the post office glowed with warm golden light, though no one had lit a single candle inside. Through the glass, they thought they saw a familiar silhouette sitting by the window, hat tilted, pen in hand, smiling. The piano from the hill began to play again, gentle and slow. Lucille clasped her hands together and whispered, "He's still delivering." The crowd stood in silence, the light shimmering across their faces, each of them feeling something wordless yet whole. The next morning, the golden letter in the post office had disappeared. In its place was a small card that read, "Deliver every day as if someone's waiting for hope." From that day onward, the people of Saint-Céline began leaving their own anonymous letters, notes of love, forgiveness, and encouragement tucked beneath doors, pinned to baskets, or tied to trees. No one ever signed them, but every letter carried that same faint lavender scent. The post office became a temple of kindness, its bell ringing each dawn as if Marcel himself still began his route. And so, the legend of the old postman's letters lived on not as a story of loss, but as a promise that goodness, once delivered, never fades. The river lights returned every spring, the piano still played on the hill, and every time the wind carried the smell of lavender through the valley, someone would smile and whisper, "Marcel has made another delivery."